Hi everyone. I received some messages from some of you asking me to compare the different master's education options that are available in the country, in India mainly. And so I thought I'll make one video or discuss it in one lecture regarding the master's programs in India. And this is also the admission season, so a lot of you must have received your admits into different universities in India. So I thought it's a good time to compare the different master's options available, mainly in analog and RF is what I'm going to talk about. It will apply to digital design as well. So mainly for semiconductors, this is definitely that's something that's going to apply for. Okay, so in India, mainly you have the standard MTech program. So again, a disclaimer, what I'm going to suggest here is my personal opinion, and I'm not going to ask you to pick one. Maybe I may accidentally give you some suggestions, which it might look like I'm suggesting an option, but I will try my best to be objective and give you the pros and cons of all the three options. Mainly, there are three options available in India for analog and RF MS programs and master's programs. I'll give you the pros and cons of all the three programs, and then you have to finally decide what works for you. Okay, so don't ask me. Sometimes I receive messages asking which one should I pick. See, you have to start making those decisions. What I'll do is give you the information that's necessary for you to make those decisions. Okay, so every individual is different, so their decisions is a function of what they require and what are their dreams and goals in their life. So I'll let you decide that. Okay, so mainly I'll start the discussion now. So we have three master's programs in India. So one is the standard MTech program. Okay, Master of Technology in any specific field. This has been there. This is one of the oldest master's program in India. It's a standard 2 year program in the country, and it's almost there in every discipline. But mainly we'll talk about circuit design. We have MTech in VLSI. Okay, so these MTech programs, MTech in there is also ICS Integrated Circuits and Systems program in IIT Madras. So usually these are all fixed duration programs. So these programs will be fixed for 2 years, and generally, most of these programs will have a 3 semester coursework and 1 semester project work. So most of IITs operate on a semester-based system, and so 3 semesters of coursework and 1 semester of project work. So project work, you typically, you pick a guide. So based on your skill set and all that, you apply for your projects and you pick a guide. And usually they'll be having some program projects with their PhD students, and they'll associate you with one of them. Okay, so that's the normal plan for an MTech, and it's a fixed 2 year duration program. Okay, and even this coursework, first 2 semesters will be what we call compulsory courses or disciplinary courses. So these courses are something that is mandatory for you. They are fixed in your transcript. You have to take those courses. For example, if you take a MTech program in VLSI design, then basic analog integrated circuits, basic digital IC design, these are all mandatory courses. For example, an RFIC design will be like an elective course. Okay, so it depends on what specialization you take MTech in. So typically, if you take an MTech in VLSI, the general VLSI programs, then there are some mandatory courses. You also have to take a mandatory device physics course and one IC fabrication course. Okay, these are all mandatory required courses. So that will be there for typically 2 semesters. After 2 semesters, you have 1 semester where you can take elective courses. So that is, you have freedom to pick from a range of courses offered in the department. So 1 semester of electives, 2 semesters of fixed mandatory courses, or what we call in the institute where I work, we used to call it the compulsory disciplinary courses, and you have to take it for 2 semesters. And 1 semester, uh, you take electives, and finally in the last semester, you don't have any coursework. Mainly it's project. You do a project for 6 to 7 months, and you'll have some credits for the project as well. So whatever be the courses and whatever be the project's length, eventually at the end of 2 years, you get a degree in this option. So by end of 2 years, a degree is guaranteed, and you have your degree at hand, and you sit for placements typically in the last semester. Okay, and you after the 2 years you start working. Now, if you compare other program, MS Research program, now this was something that was introduced recently. This is not an old program. This was introduced in, at least to my knowledge, popularly it was done in 2000s. Now, MS Research program was introduced to draw more students into R&D, into research inside universities. Okay, so like I said, for any good MS research in universities, you need good faculty and of course also a supply of high quality good students. Okay, so they also work and they contribute to the research R&D outputs of the institute. So this was one of the programs, which is relatively a new program. MS research programs operate very differently compared to an MTech program. MS research or more, the focus is very narrow. In an MTech program, the compulsory courses that you have to do will range from digital IC design to device physics, IC fabrication techniques. So you may also have to take a course on CAD for IC design. So it's mandatory. These are all required courses. There is a wide range of topics that you have to learn. But whereas in MS research, usually the coursework is decided, with your guide. Your guide and you sit together and decide what courses you would like to do. Okay. Again, even here, there are some fixed courses, and here it's a very specialized degree. So, for example, if I'm doing MS research in an analog IC design with an analog prof, typically you don't even need to have a digital IC design course in your course list. So typically there will be 5 to 6 courses maximum. You won't exceed that. And the expectations are that you finish your coursework as early as possible. When we were one of the first MS by research students in IITM. I come from the first generation of students from MS research students at IITM. So the focus was that professors would, because at that time the focus was on research, they would ask us to finish the courses within a semester. But it's now been extended to 1 year. So typically 1 year, 2 semesters you spend doing coursework. 6 courses, I think. That's the maximum coursework. But for an MS by research program, the important thing is not coursework, but what you do after the coursework. Coursework is in fact just a minimum requirement. You just have to fulfill that and start your research. And that's why MS research program is almost like a PhD. It's almost, I would say, 50% of a PhD work. Sometimes MS research works are so good, you just add 20-30% extra work, and you probably, most of them might even qualify for a PhD degree. I would say that the quality of work that has come out of IITM, and sometimes they would easily qualify for a PhD degree in good, even in good American schools. So yeah, so that's that. So first year you spend 1 year on coursework. After you finish coursework, you start your project. Now that's where your degree is. The awarding of your degree is entirely dependent on the project you do and how long you take to execute the project. That is why the duration of an MS program is not very clearly defined. Okay, it's very nebulous. So typically, the maximum students have seen someone take even 4 years to finish it. So after 1 year, they take 3 years to do a project, minimum 2 years. So you should expect to finish your MS by research degree by 3 years. This is a very good time. Now, why is it in these 2 years, what you do in these 2 years, it's almost like a PhD, as I said. So typically your guide will have an idea. They will guide you initially because most of you come from undergraduate degrees. So you're not expected to suddenly start innovating. Okay. So your guide will have some rough idea on some research problems to work on. So the guide will give you some problems to explore. So you go through the general trajectory of a PhD student. So you start with architecture level, you just test if the idea works or not. You do a feasibility study for a few months. Then once you know this, okay, the idea is feasible. For an MS, typically the idea will not be too complicated because they keep in mind that it has to be done within a short span. So then for a few months, 3-4 months, you evaluate whether the idea works or not. Assume you spend 1 semester exploring if the idea works or not. Then you decide that idea works. So typically what we do is when the idea works, we write a paper to ISCAS because you can send a system level work to ISCAS so that you keep yourself motivated. Now, once the idea works, you know that the idea is working, then you start schematic designs. At architecture level, it's working. You start your schematic designs. And that schematic design, layout, taping out, that usually takes at least 1 year. This is a minimum duration. Schematic to tape out to layout, layout to tape out, then sending it off for silicon. Typically, if you do because you're going to do it for the first time, typically without any industry experience, it will take you 1 year of time to do that. Okay, 1 year plus I'm assuming 6 months for literature survey and all of that. And after, so 1.5 years had already gone here. Now, by the end of 1 year, when you send your chip, so typically what we do is that at that time we start writing a journal paper. So remember, so MS research is like a PhD. The expectation is typically you're supposed to write a journal paper, at least one journal, by the time you graduate an MS research program. So we start writing a journal paper once you tape out a chip, and the chip comes back within 3-4 months, and then you start testing it. That will take another 1 or 2 months. You spend testing the chip, measuring the results, adding it in your paper. If the chip works, you're well and good. If your guide is happy with the results, then you can finish it within, that's why I gave 6 months for system architecture evaluation, 1 year for tape out, silicon and all that, then another 6 months for writing your thesis, journal paper, and measuring all the results. So totally 2 years of duration. Okay, this is assuming everything goes smoothly, where your chip works and everything is perfectly fine. So that's why I said 3 years is a very good enough time. Now, some students, try to finish the coursework within 6 months. Within 6 months, they do most of the coursework. And in fact, they start up their work in the first quarter itself. I mean, first summer break itself. But it doesn't happen very often. But that's why I generally took a general case. So 3 years is a very nominal time to finish off an MS by research program. Okay. Now, what if the chip doesn't work? If the chip doesn't work, then you debug it, you figure out why it doesn't work. Sometimes it depends on your guide. You may have to send it for another revision. You send another revision, you make some changes, send it again, and you wait for the results. So you give another 6 months of time for that. So that's why I said 3.5 years. Okay, so this is the worst case time. So totally 3.5 years. 3 to 3.5 years is the duration for an MS that you can expect. This is MS by research. Another program is TIMS program. Now, TIMS program was introduced. When I was doing my MS, it was not there. We didn't have TIMS programs. It was introduced after 2010, I think after 2010. So by the time I had already joined an industry, I finished my MS and joined industry. So this was again a program introduced in collaboration with TI. So again, the goal was to develop highly skilled talents, where TI will sponsor your master's degree, MS research program, where you get slightly higher stipend than a regular MS by research student. Because regular MS by research students, they receive their funding through the government. TIMS program, the funding comes from industry. TI pays for your internship. Now, in a TIMS program, you spend 1 year on campus. You spend 1 year on campus doing the coursework. And after that, you spend the remaining 2 years or whatever the duration, what I was talking about here, as an employee with TI. Okay, not as an employee, as an intern with TI. So there in a TIMS program, typically there will be a mutual problem of interest for, mainly it's driven by industry. So they decide there is a problem that they need someone to work on. So you usually sit with them and work on it for a duration of 2 years. So usually you get a guidance of engineers from TI. Okay, so that goes on for a duration of the same way. You do an architecture evaluation, and that depends on what kind of project you have there. So you have architecture evaluation, implementation, and so on. Tape it out, then measure the results. The advantage with the TIMS program is that you get some layout help. You can ask people for some, if you have some issues with layouts, you will always get some help at TI. On top of that, when you are doing measured results, you will definitely get the benefits of the labs that TI offers. Okay, the TI labs, measurement labs are much better. So they have been professionally developed. So you have access to all those things. So TIMS gives you those benefits, but that duration will again be 3 years to 3.5 years. That's the typical duration of an MS by research program, whether it's regular MS by research or TIMS by research. Now, in a TIMS MS by research, you don't have the complete freedom to choose your problem. Typically, it's decided by the industry. They decide, and based on that, you finish your work. In an MS by research program, you have some freedom of choosing the research problem that you want to work on. So sometimes I have seen engineers, see, again, these are all extreme cases, exceptional cases. I've had some of my friends who are bored with the work in industry. They wanted to explore something different. So MS by research served as a good platform for that. I mean, ideally, PhD would have served as a good platform, but they used MS by research as that platform to explore those ideas and in an academic setting. So that's the advantage they had. Now, I listed out what is the requirements for an MS by research program. I'd also told you the duration it takes. So typically you have to tape out a chip, measure the results, and publish a paper. So you go through all these experiences in an MS by research program. In an MTech program, it entirely depends on you and the project you get. So there is no necessity for you to even tape out. There is no requirement on pen and paper that says that you have to tape out a chip. Okay, so there is no guarantee, but because if you are generally a good academic student, you will normally be associated with a prof doing a final year project. So some of them get involved in tape out. They may not be, because it's only 6 months, they may not stay long enough for tape out and testing the results. Okay, so they don't stay that long. So typically you will be involved in a small block which a PhD student is doing or an MS by research student is doing, and you send your small block along with MS by research or a PhD student for tape out, and then you graduate after that. So MTech is a fixed 2-year program. So at the end of 2 years, you get your degree, you leave the institute. But MS by research, I said there is no fixed timeline for that. So typically it's between 3 and 3.5. Sometimes it might go worst case to 4 years. That's a very rare case. Good students, most of them who are driven and motivated, finish it within 3 years or 3.5 years. 3.5 years is a very nominal time. Okay. So be prepared, 3.5 years. The benefits you get as an MS by research student is a complete IC. You go through a complete IC design cycle from architecture. So I said very briefly, I'll probably make another video talking about IC design cycles. But very briefly, you start with architecture, and then once you're done with architecture, then you go through design phase. Then design includes here mostly schematic design. So when I'm talking about architecture, normally you evaluate the performance of an architecture either using a system level, right? So you use either MATLAB, Simulink, or Python, or even I use a combination of MATLAB and Verilog. So this is what I use, MATLAB and Verilog on Cadence. So I'm comfortable with both. So whatever you're comfortable with, you can use. So I use mostly MATLAB and Verilog. I have done mostly on PLLs and ADCs. So I do MATLAB and Verilog. It depends on your choice. Some people use Python and Simulink. So whatever works for you. After architecture, you start design. Design will be on schematics. Then there is layout. That is also counted in the design phase. So you lay out the design. After the layout, you send it for tape out. After the silicon comes back. Then usually we also do the packaging. In the sense we give suggestions what kind of packaging you need. Okay, whether it's QFN packaging or not, or a different packaging or a BGA packaging. So typically that you don't have much freedom. Whatever the lab generally does it, you should do it. Unless you're doing a very high frequency design, then you choose the different packaging. Okay, so you end up designing the pad frame, the basic things necessary for your chip. So you go through that, and so you also take care of packaging and testing. Okay, packaging and testing of a chip. So you go through this entire process of IC design. So the knowledge base, the experience you gain in this MS by research program is immense. It's almost like I said, it's almost like a PhD. You gain experience of writing journal papers and all of that. The only problem is duration. It takes you 3 to 3.5 years to finish this. Now, another important thing, unlike an MTech course, because most of you come from BTechs, you know how to crack courses. You would have gone through, coursework based structures, right? So that's your undergraduate program. MTech program is very similar. It's not so off from a BTech program. So if you've done your undergraduate very well, then MTech program you can just easily sail through. But MS by research program is very different. Okay, and I've seen a lot of students, sometimes they realize midway through an MS program, some of them, not everyone, they realize they were not cut out for research. Okay, so there is that. So you need to be very motivated. Remember, 2.5 years is a duration where you're going to tape out a chip and go through this entire design process, write two papers, generally journal and a conference. That's the normal rule that students follow. Most of the students that I've seen, good MS works from IITM, have all followed these rules. Typically, you will have one journal at least when you before you graduate, or you'll have at least one good conference paper. So you get the experience of writing a journal paper. So that's very important. Communicating your results is your ideas and results are very important skills, which will be very valuable when you move to industry. So you are really much better ready for industry than an MTech student when you do an MS research program. The only problem is the duration. So usually you take 3 to 3.5 years. Okay. Now coming back to pay scales, because see, MS program and MTech programs, these are all, as far as industries are concerned, not many HRs are not really aware of these differences, fully aware of the differences. And so when we joined, for example, this was almost 10 years ago. So when I joined after my MS program, the pay scales that we received was similar to the pay scales of an MTech student. But I spent 1.5 years more than an MTech student because I spent 2 years doing 2.5 years doing the tape out and all of that, writing two papers and all of that. So at that time, we'd see most of us, the number of jobs available was very less. So we didn't really question, so we just took it. But now in retrospect, I realized that we should have actually asked for better pay. So I'll tell you what you can do. Students who are doing their MS now, or students who are planning to join MS, this is what you should do. Okay. So this is 2020, so you can easily demand for the rightfully deserving pay, and it's a very reasonable ask. So what you can do is count any time that you spent more than 2 years in an MS program as experience. Okay, so count anything more than 2 years as experience. And typically, if you also have a journal paper, let's say you publish it in JSSC or even a TCAS 1, then you will be at a very good position to demand for a reasonable salary. Now, what I would say, which I feel is a very reasonable number to ask for, is count your experience this way. Typically for an MS program, this comes to 1 to 1.5 years. So you should be treated like an employee with an experience of 1 to 1.5 years, because you go through the whole design cycle of an IC designer. So when I was working for a company, I won't take names, when I was working, I was at a reasonably senior position. So I made it clear that if you are going to hire an MS student, then we have to pay, at least I conveyed very strong to my manager that we have to pay accordingly. We should not pay them like an MTech student. We have to pay them more than an MTech student. So typically, as I said, experience should be counted as MS duration minus 2 years. 2 years is the duration for an MTech program in India. So that comes to around 1 to 1.5 years. Okay, even take it, say 2 years. If you have done very good work, you will be in a very good position to ask for this. So let's assume X is the salary for an MTech program. This is the salary that an MTech student receives. Let's say X is the CTC that the student receives after an MTech program. Typically within 1 year to 1.5 years, you can expect 20 to 25% hike in your based on your performance in India. You can expect a 20 to 20% hike in your salary. Okay, this is a very reasonable number based on most of the analog and RF companies follow this rule in India. So 20-25% when you're in the early stages of your career is very reasonable. Okay, 20 to 25% hike. So what you should ask for is, if X is the MTech salary, depending on if you're from you should ask for anything between 1.2 to 1.25x. Okay, this is something you should make a recommendation to the HR. And I think it's right time that we recognize MS degrees as programs which are more than an MTech program. MTech programs are just coursework based program. MS research is the real deal. You go through the entire design process. You actually even do the board design. You test your chip, publish results. So the skill set that's developed by an MS by research student is much higher than an MTech student. It's almost, as I said, it is like a PhD student. All the skill sets of a PhD student. So therefore, there should be a difference between them. What I hear from even very up until very recently, the difference is very small. You sometimes it's like a very small delta that the industries give you. But just remind yourself, you live in one of the largest democracies in the world. I mean, and you have the highest concentration of engineering graduates, and so you are free to ask for all these things. And this is something that's important, and you should raise it. MSB research students, 1.2 to 1.25x at the end of your 3.5 years degree program, it's a very reasonable ask, and you should seriously demand for this. Okay, so I'll stop this now. I've just told you the pay scales are the same because industries, at least as of now, they treat MS by research and MTech programs the same. They don't distinguish them, but there is a huge difference. I've tried to explain the difference in a very short duration, but you can already see the amount of skill set that an MS by research student learns. Compare them to an MTech student, it's much greater. Okay, so if you ask me personally, for a good IC designer, I would highly recommend MS by research, but it's entirely up to you. Okay, what's your career plan and everything. So I've listed out all this. From an IC design point of view, the knowledge you gain, the amount of it, because here if you see, you do the architecture on your own, and then you go through this entire process. So if you look at my previous lecture, which was about the design engineer roles, you can easily understand that someone who has done an MS research degree, it's almost like a PhD, can easily be a very good quality engineer. Okay, so you'll move on to very good positions very quickly compared to a student who has just as an MTech degree. But keep this in mind. This is a very reasonable ask. Don't quote me, but this is a anybody with any logical person would say this is what you should be doing. Okay, this is what I think, and you have a right to demand for it. Now it depends on the industry what they do. But this is something you should negotiate for. Is what I would recommend. Okay. Okay. Thank you.